I think that's one of the ways people see the witch, as a subversive figure, as a figure who undercuts the kind of structures of society that actually today we find problematic: patriarchy, certain kinds of organised religion, and so on. And certainly that's the way that the witch was seen in the period of the witch trials. So somebody who was probably heretical in terms of religion, who was probably politically subversive in some way, so may have been seen to be acting against magistrates or kings, or other figures in their society who were supposed to have authority, but perhaps felt anxious about how much they actually had. People who were perhaps sexually subversive in some way, so maybe they had an illegitimate child, which by the standards of their time was regarded as a terrible and sinful thing. Or maybe they were people who had lived in ways which were not approved of by their society, had multiple partners, for example. So there's a whole range of different ways that people might come to the attention of the authorities. Some of them may have practiced magic, and we've heard today that, you know, magic, it was a magical world, wasn't it? It was a world full of spirits and goblins and animal familiars and heaven knows what. And therefore some of those people may have thought of themselves as magicians, but many of them would have been people who didn't think of themselves in that way at all and were, if you like, just like us. And that's one of the things that really prompted me to write the book. It was that sense that this could have happened to us, and it could still happen to us in a variety of ways. People are still being witch hunted. And we can talk about what we mean by that term if you want to. But certainly in the past, those were the kind of characteristics that might have defined a witch.
Yeah, so the stereotype of the witch in the early modern period is something that 17th century people have in their own minds. They would recognise the modern stereotype of the old woman bent, you know, perhaps physically disfigured in some way, leaning on a crutch with the animals around. That was a sort of a fixed stereotype. They don't always, and it's an interesting thing because we can come on to talk about it, they don't actually abide by that stereotype when they come to make accusations, not always. And that witchcraft is a much more deeper felt thing, but those two things are going on at the same time. So yeah, as Marion was saying, that witches are fundamentally powerless people who other people imagine have power, probably unfairly, or in some cases that they claim power to themselves. So witchcraft is power for the powerless. That's what the standard image is. And so the question, and it's never really resolved in the period, and this is one of the reasons why evidence and proof is so difficult at trials, is actually quite how witches do have this power, how they actually get it. So that there is a tension between theological, demonological ideas from above, what we call a learned tradition of witchcraft, and the folk knowledge of witchcraft. And they sort of meet in the area of the demon and sort of in the area of the demonic imp, which you're asking about. So that theologians and ministers and magistrates don't have much truck with the animal familiar, because actually the way in which Protestant ideologues, ministers, preachers, what they want to communicate through witchcraft is really that this is about worshipping the devil in your heart. It's not some gross material thing where actually you meet a demon. But, you know, these are very abstract ideas that are easy for kind of Oxbridge-educated ministers to understand, but for most of the unlettered congregation, that they will understand the communication to the unseen, invisible world in a much more literal, graphic, visceral sort of way. And so that even though the learned tradition doesn't like the idea of the animal familiar, it's an important part of the folk tradition, especially in England, because this is the way that it's a way of kind of visually reifying what the idea of the witch forming the pact with the devil in her heart onto something which is physical. I mean, anyone's read kind of the Philip Pullman, the Dark Materials trilogy. The idea of the demon there is the sort of the fantasy of the externalized soul who becomes a soulmate and becomes and takes an animal form that is shape-shifting until you settle and grow up. And of course there is something in that. So it makes complete sense, but it does also expose the tension between the idea of witchcraft from above and the idea of witchcraft from below, to put it crudely, and that there has to be a negotiation between those two things in the courtroom for somebody actually to be convicted.